In this video, we'll be going over the best cards that are actually supposed to be evil or dark counterparts of existing cards in the game. And at number 10, we have Dark Lord Zerato. This card is the evil counterpart of Archlord Zerato, as they both share the same stats and type, only being different with one of them being the dark attribute. And Dark Lord Zerato came out before Dark Lords were really an archetype, and was probably meant to just be a fallen angel type aesthetic, as I believe Dark Angels are called Fallen Angels or something in the OCG. Now, what Dark Lord Zerato does is you can send one dark monster from your hand to the graveyard to destroy all of your opponent's monsters. But if it activates its effect, it destroys itself during the end phase. And also, you can tribute summon this card with only one tribute, as long as you have 4 or more dark monsters with different names in your graveyard, and your one tribute is a dark monster. So it's an alternative summoning condition rather than having 2 tributes because it's a level 7 monster. And this card actually saw a healthy amount of competitive play during the Dark Armed Dragon format. Because Dark Armed Dragon was a deck that revolved around controlling a whole bunch of different types and numbers of dark monsters in your graveyard. Plus, its effect to destroy all of your opponent's monsters was really powerful during the 2008 format. Eventually, after Dark Armed Dragon decks stopped seeing play, so did Dark Lord Zerato. Until 2016 when they released the new wave of Dark Lord support. And then, for a short time when people were still playing Dark Lord decks, he was definitely included along their lineup, as an excellent level and target for Xyz plays, and the occasional use of its effect to actually destroy stuff as well. And at number 9, we have Evilswarm Thunderbird, which is the evil version of Mist Valley Apex Avian, the boss monster of the Mist Valley archetype. Although it's kind of surprising that the evil version of this card is actually a lot weaker stats-wise. But this weaker version definitely saw a lot more play than its normal counterpart, which itself was actually a pretty good card and sees competitive play occasionally. Now, what the entire Evilswarm archetype does is basically just be dark versions of other cards. So, I made sure to only pick one monster from their full lineup, and out of all of the Evilswarms, Evilswarm Thunderbird has just seen the most amount of play over time. And that's for a few reasons, but first let's go over its effect. During either player's turn when a card is activated, you can activate this card's quick effect in order to allow it to banish itself into your next standby phase, and then it will return to the field with 300 more attack. So this card is excellent at dodging effects, in the same way as Wind Up Rabbit, and was used alongside Wind Up Rabbit in a whole bunch of anti-meta decks. That way you could just control the field and constantly dodge any effects that your opponent might try to use. However, Evilswarm Thunderbird was also just useful in regular Evilswarm decks as well, as it's a level 4 monster that just happened to have a useful effect. And Evilswarm decks saw a lot of play due to their boss monster straight up countering Dragon Rulers during its height, since Evilswarm Ophion had a passive effect that didn't allow level 5 or higher monsters to be special summoned while it was on the field. And all it required was 2 Ice Swarm monsters as its materials, so Evilswarm Thunderbird was a perfect card that was good on its own, and also contributed to going into Evilswarm Ophion later on if need be. And because Evilswarm Thunderbird saw success inside Evilswarm decks, as well as decks outside of its archetype, that just meant it saw more play than all the other main deck Evilswarm monsters. And at number 8, we have Evilswarm Ophion. Now, I know I said I'd only pick one Ice Swarm monster from the archetype, although I'm going to kind of split them off between main deck and extra deck monsters. And Evilswarm Ophion was the reason Evilswarms were a competitive deck. Back in the 2013 format when Dragon Rulers and Spellbooks were the 2 best decks in the game, Evilswarm decks were able to compete with both of them because of Evilswarm Ophion. Now, first off, Evilswarm Ophion is the evil version of Gungnir Dragon of the Ice Barrier, and even has similar stats, having 50 more attack and 50 less defense. One of the hallmarks of the Evilswarm archetype is to have increments of 50 in their attack and defense, which signifies that they're evil versions of these cards. Although its effect has nothing to do with its normal counterpart, just like Evilswarm Thunderbird. Its effect is that it passively prevents level 5 or higher monsters from being special summoned, which is an excellent job of blocking out all Dragon Rulers as well as the boss monster of the Spellbook archetype. It also has an effect where it can search out an Infest spell or trap card from your deck to your hand, which was usually used in order to search out Infestation Pandemic, which was a quick play spell card that, when activated, would make it so all your Ice Swarm monsters were unaffected by spell and trap cards for the rest of the turn, which also helped them a lot against Spellbooks, where most of the removal was in the form of Spellbook spell cards, as well as their main boss monster who was an above level 5 monster. Evilswarm Ophion was both the Floodgate and the Searcher for their protection, which is what made him so good against those 2 decks in particular, that after both of those decks stopped seeing as much play, Evilswarm stopped seeing as much play as well because they just happened to be really good counters to some of the best decks, and then once they were no longer the best decks, they weren't good counters against whatever was next. Evil Swarms outside of Evilswarm Thunderbird basically stopped seeing play around 2015, after the last of the Dragon Rulers were banned. And at number 7, we have Cairngorgon, Antiluminescent Knight. This card is the evil version of Gem Knight Crystal, and it definitely seems like it's probably an Evil Swarm card because of the 50 units of attack and defense. But actually, the original card it's based on just had 50s in its attack and defense as well. Now, this card isn't an obvious evil version of Gem Knight Crystal, but if you look closely at its artwork, its body is that of Gem Knight Crystal. It also has pieces and parts of Gem Knight Zirconia, Gem Knight Master Diamond, and Gem Knight Prismura, as it seems to be an amalgamation of those monsters using Gem Knight Crystal as its base. And for being an evil version of Gem Knight monsters, its effects have nothing to do with Gem Knights, and is purely generic. It requires 82 level 4 monsters as materials, has decent stats for a rank 4 monster, and has the Spell Speed 2 effect where, when a card is activated that targets a card on the field, you can detach one of its materials to move that target to something else, assuming the other card is an appropriate target. So if your opponent uses a Raigeki break, for example, you could use this card in order to redirect it to another one of your opponent's cards. Or if they used Karma Cut, which can only target monsters, you'd be able to redirect it to another monster, but not a spell or trap card. So basically, it just allows you to redirect targeted effects, which was actually pretty good. And the card occasionally sees play even today, but only occasionally. Being able to redirect targeted effects is nice and all, and the card definitely saw a lot of competitive play over the years, but only when there was a really good deck that was specifically targeting things, like maybe Zodiac Trident or Masterpiece. And at number 6, we have Dark Armed Dragon. This is the Dark Evil version of Armed Dragon level 7, as it has the exact same stats and type as the original, only as Dark attribute. Now, Dark Armed Dragon is part of the Dark Counterparts series of monsters, where they're literally just monsters that already exist in the game, only with Dark added to the front of their names. And they try to have an effect similar to the original monsters, other than just making up something like Evilswarm Thunderbird or Cairngorgon Antiluminescent Knight. The original Armed Dragon level 7 had an effect to destroy monsters, so Dark Armed Dragon, trying to play homage to its original monster effect, while also fitting within the dark theme of the Dark Counterpart cards, has the effect that you can destroy one card in the field by banishing one dark monster from your graveyard. And also, if you control exactly 3 dark monsters in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. And since its special summon doesn't require you to move resources anywhere, if you had 3 copies of Dark Armed Dragon in your hand, you can bring out all 3 of them for the same activation costs. Which is why the card got limited pretty quickly after it came out, because Dark Armed Dragon formed one of the very few Tier 0 decks in the game, where over 65% of representation at top events were all variants of Dark Armed Dragon decks. And a big reason this card was so good was because its ability to destroy cards on the field was not once per turn, and this portion of the game still had priority before Master Rule 3, where a monster who normally has a Spell Speed 1 effect was able to activate it like a Spell Speed 2 effect during your turn when it was brought out. So, when you summoned Dark Armed Dragon, you could activate its effect to destroy a card in the field immediately, or in response to being destroyed by something like a Bottomless Trap Hole, which is not how Spell Speed 1 monster effects work today. So, in combination with this old ruling, and the fact that it could just destroy up to 3 cards as soon as it came out, while also having a big body and being easy to bring out on top of all that, it was kind of a powerhouse. And there was a lot of dark support at the time. Well, there still is a lot of dark support today, but dark is definitely the best attribute in the game because of its huge amount of support. But there was also a lot of support for dark monsters even back in 2008, especially since Synchro Monsters just came out then, and it comboed very well with cards like Emergency Teleport and Return from the Different Dimension, to the point where most Dark Armed Dragon decks were just referred to as Teledad, since they'd all play Emergency Teleport in order to bring out Krebons for synchro plays and then end with a Dark Armed Dragon. Although Dark Armed Dragon being limited to 1 copy for close to 10 years did a really good job of making sure it didn't see as much play as it did in its heyday. And after the power creep of the game got to the point where destroying all of your opponent's cards isn't even a big deal anymore, it hasn't really seen any play since 2019 when it was taken off the ban list completely. And at number 5, we have Shaddoll Beast. Shaddoll Beast is the corrupted form of Natura Beast, as they both share the exact same stats, although all Shaddoll main deck monsters are considered spellcaster type monsters and dark attribute to signify that they're corrupted versions of their original counterparts. Since the entire Shaddoll archetype is also just an evil archetype of existing monsters, I'm only going to choose one main and extra deck monster for them as well. And when it comes to main deck Shaddoll monsters, Shaddoll Beast is kind of like the Evilswarm Thunderbird, and its own deck saw a lot of competitive success, but it was also played heavily outside of its archetype as well. Now, all Shaddolls have two effects, a flip effect and an effect that activates when they're sent to the graveyard by a card effect. Shaddoll Beast's flip effect is to draw 2 cards and discard 1. Pretty good effect, but it rarely actually ever got to use that. And its graveyard effect was when this card was sent to the graveyard, you got to draw 1 card. And that's the effect Shaddoll Beast is known for the most, because that's just really good advantage to have in pretty much every deck. If there's a deck that could send dark monsters to the graveyard, Shaddoll Beast was an excellent target because it could just let you draw cards with that effect. And the Shaddoll archetype was very fusion heavy, and the card going to the graveyard, part of a fusion summon, counted as going to the graveyard as a card effect, which would allow you to draw a card if you use Shaddoll Beast as a fusion material. And since his effect was direct advantage and the best way to gain advantage, drawing a card, it appeared in pretty much every single Shaddoll deck that existed, plus a whole bunch of other decks outside of the Shaddoll archetype. In fact, it saw play in over 600 competitive decks that topped official events over the years, which is about 2 times the number of decks that Dark Armed Dragon appeared in, despite the fact that Dark Armed Dragon was part of a Tier 0 deck. Shaddoll Beast is just a powerhouse in being really useful, and still sees competitive success even to this day. There are very few archetype-specific cards that exist which can beat the number of deck spots this one card has. Generally, numbers like that are only seen on really good generic staple cards. And at number 4, we have Shaddoll Construct. This is the main boss monster of the Shaddoll archetype and was the second ever fusion monster to be banned, so you know it must have been good if it was banned for a while. Now, Shaddoll Construct is the evil version of Gem Knight Lapis. Surprising enough, a level 3 normal Gem Knight monster who doesn't really look anything like Shaddoll Construct. I'm not sure what the YuGiOh card lore is on it, but apparently the Link monster Shaddoll Construct shows Gem Knight Lapis being turned into Shaddoll Construct. Or at least Gem Knight Lapis's soul is being converted or something. I don't know, but for the longest time I thought Shaddoll Construct was just an original card for the Shaddolls, but it turns out it's like an evil evolution of Gem Knight Lapis. Anyways, what Shaddoll Construct does is if it battles a special summon monster, you get to destroy that monster at the start of the damage step. So basically, it can crash into any other extra deck or boss monster and it will always win the battle unless they're immune to destruction effects. It also had a really good effect when it was summoned, where it could send a Shaddoll card from your deck to the graveyard. If you sent Shaddoll Beast to the graveyard, it could allow you to draw 1 card on its summon. And also, a trait shared amongst all the Shaddoll fusion monsters, if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add a Shaddoll spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand. And it doesn't matter how it's sent to the graveyard, so you could detach a Shaddoll fusion monster as an Xyz material, and then get a search when they were detached to activate their effects, which is a pretty rare form of floating, and one of the best kinds of floating you can possibly have. So it was just pure advantage when it came to summoning and leaving the field, while also having an excellent effect on the field, one of the highest attacks of all the Shaddoll fusion monsters, and being one of the best attributes, as all the Shaddoll fusion monsters required a Shaddoll monster, plus a monster of their specific attribute. And if you use Shaddoll Fusion to bring it out with materials from your deck, you could send a light monster from your deck to the graveyard, which would allow you to possibly gain more advantage if you sent Fairy Tale Snow or Perform Mage Trick Clown. And also, side note, apparently Shaddoll Fusion is the corrupted version of Gem Knight Fusion, which adds a lot more credence to the fact that Gem Knight Lapis is Shaddoll Construct. Since if you look closely at Shaddoll Fusion, there's lots of dark gems in the artwork, which is very reminiscent of the gems in Gem Knight Fusion, which makes it one of the few spell cards that's a dark counterpart of another spell card. And at number 3, we have Evil Hero Adusted Gold. This is the evil version of Elemental Hero Captain Gold, and is part of the Evil Hero archetype, which is one of 6 archetypes of hero monsters. And funny thing about the hero archetype, their deck plays best when they have an amalgamation of all types of the heroes, and the one evil hero monster they play is Evil Hero Adusted Gold, as it has the effect where you can discard this card from your hand in order to add a dark fusion monster from your deck to your hand, which is generally used to add Dark Calling. As what Dark Calling does is it allows you to fusion summon an evil hero monster by banishing the materials from your hand, graveyard, or field, which is one of the most versatile fusion cards that allows you to use materials from your graveyard, as most of them don't allow you to use from your hand and field in addition to the graveyard. And a good target for Dark Calling is Evil Hero Malicious Bane, who surprisingly combos well with heroes in general and not just evil hero monsters. And since Evil Hero Adjusted Gold is basically just played in order to search out Dark Calling and bring out Evil Hero Malicious Bane, it's the only evil hero that would possibly make this list. And since hero decks have seen some competitive success towards the end of 2020, I kind of have to put it higher on the list, because I like to prefer cards that have seen competitive success recently, rather than cards that have a history of competitive success, because of just how the power creep of the game works. Otherwise, Shaddoll Beast would probably take the number 1 spot if I only went over the history of the card alone, instead of how good they are currently. Even though Shaddoll Beast is also good currently, I might add, it's just hero decks have seen a little bit more success in the past year than Shaddolls or Shaddoll Beast usage, which is why Evil Hero Adjusted Gold takes a slightly higher spot on this list. And at number 2, we have Dark Grepher. This is another dark counterpart card, just like Dark Armed Dragon, although this one is a dark counterpart of a vanilla monster called Warrior Dark Grepher. And since it's a darker version of a normal monster, they could probably just give it whatever effect they wanted. So they gave it one in order to help set up a dark type deck, as it could special summon itself from the hand by discarding a level 5 or higher dark monster, and it could also allow you to discard a dark monster to send a dark monster from your deck to the graveyard. So back in the Dark Armed Dragon format, Dark Grepher could be used to single-handedly send all 3 monsters needed for Dark Armed Dragon summoning condition to the graveyard. So it definitely saw play because of that. After Dark Armed Dragon stopped seeing play, Dark Grepher just never really did. He kept powering on and was used constantly throughout the years in other competitive decks, even when the powerhouse like Dark Armed Dragon wasn't really. In fact, he got super good during the Link era when warrior type decks started dominating the scene, and specifically dark warrior type monsters. And Dark Grepher was so good in dark warrior combo decks that it eventually got limited to 1 copy, to try to rein in its power of sending dark cards to the graveyard. And even to this day, it still sees competitive success. It has a very long history of just constantly seeing competitive play, even if it doesn't really match the numbers of Shaddoll Beast when it comes to deck appearances and competitive play at official events. But then again, very few cards do. And at number 1, we have Evilswarm Exciton Knight. This card is the dark counterpart of Steel Swarm Roach, which is related to the Evilswarm archetype. So it's weird there's a dark counterpart of an already dark archetype. But that's because Evilswarm Exciton Knight is actually a light version of a dark card, as it has the same stats and type as the original, only it's a light attribute instead of dark. Which kinda breaks the rules of this list a little bit for evil counterparts, but it does have Evilswarm in its name, and all of the Evilswarm cards are evil versions of the normal counterpart cards, except for Evilswarm Exciton Knight, I guess. And also, I said I wouldn't use any more Evilswarm monsters for this list, but Evilswarm Exciton Knight is kind of an exception to that rule, as it's purely generic and has nothing to do with the archetype it's named after. It also saw more play than all the other cards in the Evilswarm archetype, as what this card does is during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase, it has a Spell Speed 2 effect, where it can detach one of its materials to destroy all other cards in the field, as long as your opponent has more total cards in their hand in their side of the field than you do. And also, your opponent takes no further damage for the rest of the turn, and it's not a once per turn, merely once per chain. Now, what this means is Evilswarm Exciton Knight was the perfect comeback card. If your opponent had a single more card in advantage than you did, in fact, if you had the same amount of advantage and you just overlaid in order to go into this rank 4 monster, that would put you 1 card behind in advantage to your opponent, which would allow you to meet the conditions for its effect in order to destroy all other cards. And since it was Spell Speed 2, if your opponent tried to preemptively negate its effects or destroy this card, you could just chain its effect to negation or destruction in order to destroy all the cards on the field. His effect was designed in a way to kind of mimic the Master Rule 2 and below's priority effects, so it was kind of hard to stop this card's effect from going off. Not impossible, like all you had to do was just wait for it to activate its effect in order to use your negation, as it couldn't then chain its effect on top of it again. But since it was quick effect, it could just activate its effect in response to getting destroyed by something. And since it was so good at just completely wiping the field, and was super easy to bring out as it had one of the best levels in the game, a generic rank 4 monster that only required 2 materials, it was actually banned for a long time. Then in Master Rule 4, the card slowly got unbanned and then started seeing play again because with limited field zones for Xyz monsters before the revisions, its effect was just good enough where it was still worth playing. So the card saw play when it first came out, was super good and immediately became a staple in all extra decks, and still sees play even today, where rank 4 Xyz monsters aren't really as dominant as they used to be. Evilswarm Exciton Knight was just so good that it's one of the few rank 4 Xyz monsters that still sees competitive success. Although since it was banned for a couple of years, it still doesn't beat Shaddoll Beast when it comes to number of decks that it was part of that saw topping spots in official events, as it only has a measly 500 plus representation spots, as opposed to the over 600 plus that Shaddoll Beast has. So Shaddoll Beast is probably the most played evil counterpart card, even if Evilswarm Exciton is probably the best evil counterpart card. Alright, and that's the video. If you think I missed any other dark counterpart cards that are better than the ones that I listed in this video, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments as well as ideas for future videos just like this one. Also, look at this graph.